Hello, welcome to this video where today, pardon the pun, we blow Warlord's painting guide for the Spanish fleet out of the water. Stay tuned. Alright, so if you guys have the Spanish Navy or if you're Black Seas are interested in picking that up, I'm sure you've run across the painting guide by Warlord games suggesting that they paint the ships with black hulls and red stripes, right? Well, there's only a little bit of truth to that. In reality, if you take a look at the historical documentation and the actual accounts of the ships in combat and the eyewitness reports, you'll find there's a whole lot more to the Spanish color schemes story than Warlord presents. And in all fairness to Warlord games, it's pretty complicated, so to keep the models visually different across the table, it's a compromise. But if you're interested in making your Spanish fleet a little bit more accurate historically, you've got a little bit of thinking to do. Now, think about it. We have the game covers a span of Black Seas covers about 1750-ish to or 1780 to 1830-ish. Well, there's a lot of changes happened during that time. So there's a couple different changes. I'm going to talk about the smallest one first. Up until 1793, Spanish ships were fitted with a figurehead of a gilded lion. You know, that's a symbol of the royalty, right? So, but beginning in 1793, it was decreed that ships were allowed to create a figurehead that could be reminiscent of the ship's name. So, for example, you'll have the frigate Diana would have the figurehead resembling the goddess Diana from mythology. There's one is a Montañas, that's Highlander basically, and not Scottish Highlander, but Highlands is a type of individual who's used to living in the mountainous regions of a particular nation. The bowsprit, or the figurehead, could be fashioned to represent that. Neptuno, you have Neptune on, it's a figurehead. So all of a sudden, from 1793 forward, figureheads could have some variation. Alright, so that's the simplest one. It doesn't mean they abandoned the gilded lion, but you could have a little more variety. Now where color scheme comes in, this is where it's almost the sailing circus. That's my expression. Sorry, I apologize if someone takes offense at that. But think of, during, Spain kind of was getting its national identity during the period. In fact, the flag really wasn't settled on until sometime in there. Matter of fact, I'll probably have a separate video going over the Spanish flag coming up. So, in the early days of the Spanish, or early years, we'll go up to 1776. It's just a coincidence that happens to equate to the American Independence War. But you have the Navy ships having essentially a wider range of, not necessarily colorations, they were always patterned after what was typical, what paint was most available and cheapest, which was really kind of an off yellow. When you think yellow sides, it's not the lemon yellow you used to think, and it's more of, as some of the British contemporaries used to call it, baby puke yellow. And actually Vallejo's ochre brown is pretty close to some of the representations I've found, but anything around that reddish yellow light color is where you want to go. It's not a red though, it's not an orange, but it's a yellow that's kind of got some reddish tint to it. So it's not very bright. But what they did, now a lot of navies use that same color, but in the Spanish Navy, up until 1776, like I said, the amount of yellow on the side would vary. It would maybe just the one row of guns, they call them bridges, and that's it. That would be the only thing that would be painted yellow. Others, it would be the entire side from the, if it's a 2 or 3 decker, from the low deck bridge all the way up to include the top deck of the top bridge. So you might have 2 full bands completely yellow, no break. And then you might have some of them with actually a thin black line, which would be the inner deck space or inner bridge space, where the deck kind of runs. So you'd have yellow, black, yellow. A lot of variation there, and the variation in yellows was going to be different. Come 1776, it was decreed, specifically by royal decree, that all the ships would be painted the same. It would use that same kind of a yellowish red, or sorry, reddish yellow, ochre kind of color on the sides, only on the bridges. Okay, so that's where the gun lines are. Okay, the rest of the hull was black. Now inside on the side, it would be a reddish, but that's more an iron oxide red. And I'll show you the colors in a minute. We'll go over the colors at the end. The color of basically the ornate work on the back, the castles, were actually, they call it porcelain, it was kind of white, but it had blue. So now there's going to be a lot of variation in those particular sterns, all the beautiful carvings and everything there, but you're going to have some blues and whites mixed in with some gilded highlights, because that's just the thing to do back in that day. So all of a sudden you're standardizing, but it's yellow and black, not red and black. Okay. The decree was very specific. It excluded any possibility of variation from that theme, except by explicit permission of the king. So the royal, or they call it the Royal Navy in Spain. That's Real Armada is Royal Navy. So the Spanish Royal Navy actually had a decree. The king decreed that the Santísima Trinidad, the huge four-decker, was going to be painted red. And it was a nice bright, well, not bright, but a really rich red, not an iron oxide color. That was in stark contrast to all the rest of the ships of the fleet. And after that point, there were a couple other ships that started to get some of those variations, but they were very few. You have to do some research to pick them on. I personally have not found all those ships, because I've already picked the ships I want to build in my fleet, and I've researched the colors for those. Now here's where the coloring gets really interesting, because for the Spanish Navy, they were always cash-strapped. They actually didn't really have a standing navy like the British or French did. They would furlough all of their, or muster out, or cashier out all their sailors to a skeletal level on the ships. So every time they needed to go to war, they had to muster all these sailors. A lot of them were inexperienced again. That's reflected in the Black Sea's rules and the way you build your fleets. But as a result, being cash-strapped, the next part of the regulation couldn't be adhered to. The regulation stated that every 2 years a ship had to be repainted, again in the same color scheme that was dictated. So again, yellow-black for most of the ships. Unfortunately, a lot of the captains couldn't afford that. The Navy couldn't afford that. Now, of course, a lot of captains couldn't either. Now, there were some who, of course, at the time, they were a little more proud and a little more well-off, and they wanted their ships that were going to be sailing in line with the French to look as good, so they would actually use their own money to repaint their ships with that same yellow that they've always used. So you've got some ships in the Spanish fleet that are nice, freshly coated yellows, while you've got others that are more faded. And the faded colors then begin looking less and less yellow and more black, because they start fading and wearing off. You'll see several accounts in the Battle of Trafalgar that talk about several ships that were all black. In reality, they probably were not really all black. Now, the Santa Ana may have been all black, since it was just recently pulled out of port after refitting and repair. So they may not have actually been able to paint the yellow stripes there. But even if there were yellow stripes, and they didn't repaint the whole hull black, they would have faded so badly that from a distance you couldn't tell there was a yellow band at all. So you can get away with a very, very light wash of that brown, ochre brown, along the gun lines to get that faded effect and almost to the point of looking like a black ship. So that's another possibility. But again, 1776 through 1810, you're looking at just the yellow and black. There with the band, if there's multiple decks, with the band separating the deck still black. Now, there were some additional, after these Trinidad was given permission to be read, some additional ships, again, you'll have to research them. None of the ships in my fleet I'm modeling are worded this way, but a couple others were also given permission to be read. There weren't many, though, okay? But in 1810, all of a sudden, the ordinance was changed to allow those bands to, instead of being yellow, to be white. So here we go from 1750 in the game, 1776, you could have varying sizes of yellow on the side of the Spanish ships. From 1776 through 1810, you've got only the gun bridge is yellow, the rest is black, with a couple exceptions, which were red. Then from 1810 forward, all the gun bridges are white instead of yellow. So that's a pretty big difference. You get a lot of variety there. So pick your time, pick your ships, and pick your colors according to regulations. Now, when it comes to the rest of the ship, the deck, the gunnels, which are the areas, the walls inside of the ship that you can see above the deck, and the masts themselves, there's a lot of variation there too. A lot of them were left varnished wood. A lot of them were also painted that same yellow. But again, remember, that's an ochre brown, not a bright yellow like you see depicted in on the HMS Victory. Okay. On a side note, they did not use the checkerboard scheme, Nelson's checkerboard, because the entire side was yellow in the gun deck. When the hatches were closed, the top of the hatches were yellow as well. So if you have any models or make any models that actually have the gun ports closed, that's entirely yellow. Okay. Now, when you look at the masts, though, they will fade as well. So just like you're doing work with the on the black hull, you can fade, with a faded or washed yellow, you can do the same thing on the masts. But the masts would have been a varnished wood as a base, not black. So you go with a wood color of whatever you think is good looking wood, and then go with a light wash on it. Now, I've also seen models in the museums, Spanish museums, naval museums, that show the colors a little bit differently. And so, for example, I'm going to build the Diana, which is one of the frigates in the Spanish fleet box, and the model has more buff masts than that ochre brown, and so I'm going with more of a buff color. Matter of fact, the model in the Royal Museum actually has a varnished wood gun deck or gun bridge. So instead of it being ochre brown, it's a varnished wood. So I'm going with more of a buff color on that yellow on the side, right? So if the Royal Museum in Spain is able to do that, and they're basing it on history, what their research, I can probably model it after what they've got. Okay, so you got some variation there. Now it seems as though the tops, which are the little platforms where the masts, as the masts go up, you've got the different mast components joining. Right above the yardarms of the platform. Those appear to always be black. Now I do see some models in these museums where they're more of the wood, and there's reference to wood, but I don't see anything in the regulations about that. I haven't found it. Okay? I don't have the full printout of the regulations. I just have seen a couple websites that quote directly out of the document, and so that's where I'm basing some of this off. Some of those links are in the description below. So here we go. We've got a variation in colors on the hull sides. The bridges, not the hull. The hull is always black. The bridges are either yellow, so faded that it's almost black, or even white. Occasionally, very occasionally, red. When it comes to the masts, you're going to go with a kind of a buff color, or that that brown, ochre brown from Vallejo, kind of a reddish, almost orangish yellow, and then an iron oxide, or not an iron oxide, sorry, a terracotta color almost for the inside of the deck. So again, Warlord shows bright red inside the wall, on the inside wall. That really should be more of a terracotta. So I will use, I've got ochre brown for the sides. I use, any black will work, but I would use kind of a Georgia clay, which is a craft color from, I think it's Americana, as that clay, get a terracotta color in the inside of the ship. I've also, when it comes to the blues, I also use Delta Ceramic Coat, their Ocean Reef. That's a pretty good color for that. And in fact, one of the things that on the top of the Trinidad, I'll show a picture in a second, of the quarterdeck, you'll see the railing, and you can't see through it. It's because there's actually a canvas that goes around those I believe that's the part of the netting that's used to help resist borders. I could be wrong. I think those are called armings. Again, I could be wrong. But those were blue. That's where you get some of the blue. So you'll see a little blue highlighter along there too. So there's a little bit of variation you can do. It looks like on the sterns, again, you could go with white, and then with most of the detail. On the back, it's more of a blue surface with the detail being white or gilded, and you have a pretty nice ship when you're done with it. Unfortunately, it's not going to be red. Okay, so you don't have to buy red paints for it unless you do the Trinidad, which is an absolutely beautiful ship, and then you've got your ship will look a lot more like the the French, but remember, it's going to be flying the Spanish flag. All right. Okay, so that's all there really is to it. There's a lot there. It's not a simple thing here. But you can get a lot of variety now with your Spanish fleet, if you wanted that. And I think it adds some character to your fleet to have a little bit different. They're all going to be identified by the Spanish flag they're flying, which is pretty prominent on the stern. But they'll all have that special character to them. Some will have gilded figureheads, some will have ivory figureheads, some will be pale yellow, some will be almost non-existent yellow on the side. Some will have buffed masts, some will have yellow masts. Some will have very ornate gilded sterns, some won't. A lot of variety. Some occasional ships will be red, actually. So have some fun with it. And here are a couple, I'll just go through a few pictures of ships. These are works in process that I'm doing based on the research I've done out of the Spanish kit, the Spanish fleet kit. And you'll kind of see where I'm headed. And these, again, works in process, so they don't look the greatest, but they give you an idea of the colors that I'm using. And I will put those colors up on with the picture as we go through them. All right, so stay tuned. We'll kind of watch through those. Share, like, subscribe if you want. And again, happy sailing with these your new Spanish Navy.